There is no war without propaganda. It produces images of the enemy, stirs up fear, feelings of revenge, and guilt. It fights with exaggerations, with slogans and lies. Its weapons are the mass media. The power of moving pictures, initially tested in the First World War. Radio and film with sound gave propaganda completely new possibilities.
Amerikanische Sherman-Panzer brechen in ein von Infanteristen und Fallschirmjägern gehaltenes Dorf ein. Ein deutscher Kriegsberichter filmt den Panzereinbruch aus unmittelbarer Nähe.
Television brings war into living rooms.
Good morning greeting to the Viet Cong for the B-52.
In the age of the internet, it is not the lack of, but the abundance of information that makes it easy for propagandists and difficult for the truth. Today, war propaganda is digital and razor-sharp. The Islamic State spent millions on producing professional terror propaganda, perfectly staged and filmed in HD.
What used to be terrible is now normal. I can watch all sorts of horror videos on the internet. I can look at the executions of the IS fighters, the IS terrorists in areas that can hardly be described. They have reached an inflated status where it has become normal.
A war of information has broken out around the world's theaters of war, where people die every day. It's a permanent propaganda battle to define and justify the message.
We have a lot of straightforward violence that we haven't seen in the media for a long time. And I don't have the impression that there is a sensible way of dealing with these images and with this kind of strategy.
Wherever people form opinions with the help of mass media, propaganda has an easy time of it. Incitement, hatred, and propaganda circulate freely on the World Wide Web.
By definition, propaganda aims to influence the opinion and behavior of target groups with political objectives. The decisive factor is always the intention. If information is the basis for forming an opinion, then it's clear that propagandists are leveraging that here.
What sources, which media should one believe when the difference between truth and falsehood is barely indistinguishable? Ever since Donald Trump was elected president of the U.S., fake news has been synonymous with allegedly manipulated information.
It's all fake news. It's all fake news. This fake story. This is fake news put out by the media. I mean, they're fake. The news is fake because so much of the news is fake. Fake reporting. It is fake.
The mechanics of propaganda have been the same for hundreds of years. Recognizing them is the first step in resisting them.
We're the ones who use the media, so we darn well have to be able to figure it out. Between good, better, best, or very bad information that we get. No one is going to help us figure it out.
Niemand hilft uns daraus.
A wasteland in northern Iraq. A sniper walks across an open field of fire, just a few meters from Islamic State positions. The sniper comes from Iran, studied in England, and has now joined Kurdish fighters.
Have you noticed that there is some movement?
The city of Kobane was almost completely destroyed. It was where fighting raged between IS, the Kurds, and Western allies. Kurdish journalist Mustafa was there. Now he's trying to organize the reconstruction.
Okay, we can see this is a mortar. It's not exploded, but still dangerous because really we need experts to remove all this mortars.
In the midst of the rubble stands Kobana's theater. The IS fighters had already set up their command center here, confident of victory. Then an American aerial bomb hit the building.
So I can say this is the cultural center of Kobani. I was here. I can show you the writing. You know, it's written in black. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And you can see all the writing is written in the black color.
The Iraqi city had become a symbol of terror, death, and destruction. It was a war that had nothing in common with the conflicts of the past, when states still faced each other on the battlefield. Interest in the fate of the people here had rapidly declined in the rest of the world.
People no longer understand what kind of alliances are being forged. And that, of course, also has a wear and tear effect and creates a lack of interest, so that people say that readers or viewers simply don't want to see it anymore. One has enough problems trying to see through it all. And if you have to explain it in a few words or in a few minutes, it's very difficult.
War reporters on the ground can only capture bits of what is happening. Today, every eyewitness becomes a reporter by using their cell phone.
A theater of war is a microcosm where you are in a kind of vacuum. And the information that is collected is very difficult to verify. Of course, you have to work with what you have. But as I said, you have to cross-check, even in this era of social networks, which isn't always easy.
In Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, it is not armies that confront each other, but groups in society. Those types of conflicts are called asymmetric or hybrid wars.
We hear shooting outside. You kind of hear that, and you don't know what's going on. And you can find out from Hamburg faster than from Kabul. Then you think that the people in Kabul are copying info from Hamburg, but in fact it's the agencies. And that's exactly what causes editors to believe that they are powerful and know everything. And because, of course, they always know more than the correspondent on the ground. They think they know everything better, everything faster, but they don't know the background and the connections.
Wars like those in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria do not follow strategies. It is not armies that confront each other, but groups in society. Those types of conflicts are called asymmetric or hybrid wars.
In my view, asymmetric warfare began after 9/11, the attack on the US, and is ultimately the global fight against terrorism. It is no longer armies or states that face each other, but it's about freedom fighters, cyber war, the internet and disinformation.
The battle for Iraq had been raging on the World Wide Web from the very beginning. Fighters from both sides videoed their supposed successes and posted them on one of the popular video portals. It was all about victory on the propaganda front. In internet cafes, the perpetrators enjoyed the status of freedom fighters. Every American killed was celebrated, as if it were all just a computer game.
Also wenn ich sowas sehe, ich freue mich, wie die Iraker die Amerikaner abknallen. Die verteidigen ihr Land einfach. Man sieht immer wieder neue Toten.
Also als ob es eine Serie geworden ist. Man guckt sich das jeden Tag an, weil man weiß, dass viele Tote sterben. Es ist wie ein Spiel, ein Game geworden, Alter.
The internet as theater of war, a seemingly safe place to participate.
In recent years, it has become clear that mobilization and recruitment via the internet has become increasingly important for Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. And that's why we have to assume that such websites, especially if they are adapted to local conditions, if they are written in German and deal with German topics, German political topics, it can become very dangerous.
There are no language barriers. They speak German. The Global Islamic Media Front promotes the Holy War worldwide in the respective national language and with exclusive news from the front.
The Americans cannot win this internet war simply because we know what we are doing and because we will invest our time and our efforts and everything to fight this war. If the Americans shut down our site, the next day there will be a new site and it will go on and on.
Access to the various areas of the home page is only available to those who have registered and had their details checked beforehand. There are professionals at work here who know how to prevent unauthorized access.
We have our own security department and we also have our own hacker department. This hacker department is there to first of all protect our data. That is, our pages are not registered to any name or anything. If you go to information sites and look for our sites, you will find out that one site is registered somewhere in Malaysia. The other is somewhere in Hong Kong.
The strategies also became more sophisticated. The Holy Warriors proudly put up a fake video in which a U.S. soldier philosophizes about the futility of his mission. The GI, Lee Tucker, can be seen at a birthday party with his comrades. Then, the video shows a bomb strike allegedly showing Tucker's death.
Americans, of course, watch these films, and American soldiers also hear about these films. And of course, they are also afraid. And we want to try, or they actually want to try to create in the Americans this fear. And that the Americans are nervous and have this fear so that the soldiers can't stand it anymore.
Ein Soldat ein bisschen nervlich nicht mehr aushalten.
The story of the so-called Islamic State began with two lies. They were lies that toppled a regime, abandoned an entire region to chaos, and triggered an international war of terror. The U.S. had claimed that Iraqi strongman Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and supported the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda. The attack took place at the end of March 2003. With the fall of Hussein and his ruling Ba'ath Party, the Sunnis lost influence in one fell swoop.
The old military elites were driven from power, replaced. The military apparatus was dissolved in the broadest sense, including Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party, which not only affected the security apparatus, but also those who joined the party to earn a living.
A religious war broke out. Shiite militias killed the Sunnis who had been ousted from power, and they retaliated with bombings. The American soldiers went from being liberators to hated occupiers and made many enemies in their fight against terror. Cockpit video from a U.S. helicopter released by the WikiLeaks disclosure platform showed so-called collateral damage.
The later phases of the war were really brutal, when pilots got tired, when they simply shot. I've seen them, the American pilots in Baghdad, firing on Arab neighborhoods because they thought that was the old town. Maybe they thought they were Saddam's supporters, and when something moved there, they fired cannons from their choppers. It was just Arab workers who were attacked. And then they became opponents. And these were the people who joined up with the terrorists in droves.
You're clear. All right, firing. What's the baseline? Let me know when you have it. We'll shoot. Light them all up.
002 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shooting.
The soldiers see automatic weapons where, as it would turn out later, there were no weapons, mistook the men for potential rebels, and opened fire.
Several thousand civilians were killed in the war against IS and in the air war. This wasn't reported in any newspaper. Unfortunately, that's the way it was, the daily life of war.
A daily routine that made normal life almost impossible. What remained was grief over the dead and anger toward the perpetrators of the suffering. And in the eyes of many Iraqis, it was the Americans.
About IS, after having spread territorially, 102,000 bombs and missiles were fired. 102,000. Who knows that? ISIS knows. They knew that half of the IS people were dead, but the survivors all wanted revenge. There were simply reasons for that.
The irony of history, the supposed reason for the war, that Iraq supported terrorist networks, thus became reality only after the attack by U.S. troops. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a Sunni, had long been considered the face of al-Qaeda in Iraq. His death by U.S. troops led to the founding of a new terrorist organization, IS.
In 2006, after Sakwawi's death, the group fell on hard times, suffered major military setbacks, and possibly because of that, it became a strategic necessity to declare a so-called Islamic State, which was then called the Islamic State of Iraq.
What is known today about the history of IS is connected to the death of its strategic head, the mastermind of terror, a man named Haji Bakr. Free Syrian Army fighters found a folder in his house. Its contents, organizational charts, and lists with numbers and names. Plans about death and destruction. It was the legacy of evil.
Dadurch, dass Haji Bakr diese handschriftlichen Pläne,
the fact that Haji Bakr left these handwritten plans, some of them in various early stages, where you can even trace his thought processes, gave us the most direct insight into the innermost workings of the Islamic State that anyone had ever had.
Des Islamischen Staates, den man bislang je gehabt hat.
After the Arab Spring began in 2011, more and more jihadists in Iraq and Syria joined the movement. In the beginning, there were just 2,000 fighters. At first, the international community took little notice of them and what they wanted. Their goal was an Islamic theocracy.
This undertaking, this aim, basically allowed them to use any and all means with which they could attain their aims. And it didn't matter to them what the limits were. And it didn't matter to them whether they died. And it also didn't matter to them whether they achieved it in 1 year, in 10 years, or in 100 years.
For a long time, the U.S. tried to control the public image of war and its effects. Clean, precise, a battle of good against evil. Those were the attributes that the U.S. military dictated to media representatives.
The Iraq War of 2003 had a very clear narrative curve that can be understood by looking at Spiegel magazine covers. We have the beginning of the war, we have the build-up of tension, the walk through the desert towards Baghdad, where there were sandstorms, and then, for the climax, the urban battle in Baghdad, and the glorious end with the toppling of the Saddam statue in Firdos Square. A very classic narrative arc to the whole thing. And it's interesting to see, striking to see how it worked, how it was picked up and transmitted by the established media.
But other images of the war had long been circulating. According to the Arabic station Al Arabiya in Dubai, videos of Iraqi rebel groups were repeatedly leaked to the media that showed a different reality.
Camera is part of it. That's the difference between these days and the old days, that now people are aware of the, to use every means to win the war or to win the battle. I think media is part of it, the camera is part of it, it's a major part of it, by the way. When you film an explosion and show it, it's a double victory. And that's what the Iraqi resistance is doing. The American did it, as I told you, and the others tried to do it.
Rarely had the views of a war differed as much as they did in Iraq.
This is, of course, a very hackneyed saying, but this quote, the first thing that dies in war is the truth. And that's very true. Of course, there are parties, and there is, of course, a certain amount of influence on the part of the government and warring parties to steer a war or to steer a situation, and also the atmosphere in a certain direction. And there are always things like that where you say, okay, don't do it 3 times, do it once. Because you know from the start that A, it doesn't make sense, and B, it also doesn't seem to be true. There are some forces in the background that want to use you in some way.
Paris, Brussels, Nice, Stockholm, Berlin, and this year alone, terror attacks hit London and Barcelona.
Terror crossed all borders. In the name of Allah, people were dying in the middle of Europe. Former French intelligence officer and terrorism expert Alain Rodier saw this as an evasive strategy by Islamists.
For some time, ISIS had been facing various problems in Syria and Iraq because of the airstrikes and because of the counterattacks by the Kurds and the Iraqi and Syrian security forces. They were no longer riding the wave of success, so they decided to change the strategy and carry out terrorist acts abroad.
One of those men who planned and carried out attacks in European cities was Abdelhamid Abaoud, a Belgian with Moroccan roots. Born in Anderlecht, Belgium in 1987, he grew up in the troubled neighborhood of Molenbeek. After a conviction for assault, he turned to the IS. First, he traveled to Egypt, then to Syria. In a video from a French near Aleppo, he introduced himself with his combat name.
This is Abu Omar, the Belgian.
At only 28, Abaoud was already the leader of an IS group called Katibat.
The group of young men that the Islamic State attracted were mostly under 20, between 16 and 20. And then, when they had worked their way up, then they were in their mid-20s. Then they had certain leadership positions. They had experience in combat. They had also become brutal, extremely brutal. I'm not surprised by that. That was the typical age for Islamic State leaders. Most of the time, they didn't get very much older either.
Belgian police searched for Abaoud because he is said to have recruited fighters for IS. Nevertheless, he apparently traveled across Europe right under the eyes of the authorities. That got the mobile jihadist into the IS's glossy magazine Dabiq as a kind of poster boy.
He made fun of the intelligence services in an interview where he talked about God clouding their vision, that he managed to get back to Syria via the Balkan route and Greece. And he literally said, Muslims don't have to fear the Western intelligence services.
His contempt for the West culminated in a video made after a massacre of enemy fighters in Syria.
They fought for democracy, separation of church and state, for money. We are fighting because we want to apply Allah's Sharia.
Abaoud was killed in a police operation following the attacks in Paris. His gruesome legacy remains.
We used to pull jet skis, quads or motorcycles, trailers loaded with luggage filled with gifts to go on vacation to Morocco. Now in our last path, we pull the apostates, the infidels who fight us, who fight Islam. You can film that.
Allahu Akbar! Takbir! On a fait des morts parmi les adas Allah. Takbir! Allahu Akbar!
The Belgian district of Molenbeek, where the bomber Abaoud came from. Molenbeek had problems, drug trafficking and crime. Unemployment was high. It was a breeding ground for radical ideas. No prospects and the feeling of being an outsider in society helped to drive young Muslims to IS.
A lot of them really believe that idea that we regard them as being second-rank civilians and that we see them as some kind of lowlifes that don't belong and don't fit in our society and that need to get put aside, that we need to get put aside.
The Federal Intelligence Service in Berlin, which is responsible for foreign intelligence, was also monitoring the activities of radical Islamists and was concerned. Uwe H. headed the Internet Competence Center for the Evaluation of IS Propaganda. Together with 2 native Arabic speakers, H. analyzed several hundred videos a year.
Give me a brief overview of the sequences, please. I've been through the video a few times now. There are 2 suicide bombers. In a moment, the first one will come.
Gleich kommt der erste.
And the dialect?
Spricht Hocharabisch, aber
He speaks High Arabic, but the name is wrong. Shami is a reference to Syria.
Hinweis auf Syrien.
Stop again for a sec. What does that mean?
Das sind die Schritte, die unternommen werden sollen. Checklist.
These are the steps that are going to be taken. So first, control of the so-called White House. Second, protection and preparation for the suicide bomber. And third, control of the position.
Attentäter und drittens die Kontrolle über die Stellung.
Of course, we're interested in which fighters are being used there. That means the aspect with the dialect is interesting for us. Of course, the name of the corresponding candidate is always included. This allows us to establish a certain regional classification. Here is a message to our brothers and sisters in Germany. Join this caravan before it is too late.
In August 2015, the IS propaganda department released its first video in German. The speaker, Mohammed Mahmoud, an Austrian-born son of Egyptian immigrants.
How can it be that our sisters are exposed in Germany and Austria? How can it be that your sisters go to jail and you watch and sit there and do nothing?
Mahmoud was already attracting attention in his early 20s. The devout extremist founded an Islamist youth organization in Vienna in 2006 and gave his first interview on the banks of the Danube.
It started with foreigners being attacked, then the headscarf was attacked, and now it's always uphill with the agitation. I don't want to threaten now, but of course, those are the consequences.
He founded the Global Islamic Media Front, a jihadist website. He was tried in Vienna and sentenced to 4 years in prison for forming and promoting a terrorist organization.
You're hurting me. My hand is disabled. You're hurting me.
After his release, Mahmoud moved from Austria to Germany. In Erbach, Hesse, he made contact with the local jihadist scene and gave another interview.
I'm proud of it. I've been in prison for my Islamic faith. I've been in prison because their basic law and freedom of expression is worth nothing when it comes to other opinions.
The internet as a weapon against the kuffar, the infidels. Mahmoud was then able to openly say what he actually wanted.
Killing occurs 128 times in the Quran, of which 27 times in the form of a command. If this kafir has counted correctly, and we are proud of it. We are really proud of it.
Finally, Mahmoud set himself apart. A video showed him burning his passport. It was a farewell with an uncertain outcome. It is unclear whether Mahmoud is still alive.
My brothers and sisters, either join the Mujahideen here or carry out jihad in Germany and Austria. You don't need much for that. Take a big knife, go out on the street and slaughter every kafir.
The call to join the Holy War. No one can say exactly how many actually followed it. One thing is certain, those who had little to lose were susceptible to IS propaganda, which promised a life in paradise. London is home to the Quilliam Foundation, a think tank that monitors and analyzes the Islamic State and its propaganda. Rachel Bryson is among the organization's researchers who released a comprehensive study on the extent of ISPR on the internet.
The volume of information that Islamic State are producing is so high. We did a study as Quilliam Foundation, we studied a month of propaganda within Islamic State, and on a daily basis there were on average 38 pieces of new propaganda released every single day. And so the internet is being flooded with Islamic State images and messages and videos.
A perfect world in IS. That, above all, was what the Islamists suggested in their countless propaganda posts. An allegedly functioning state that cared for its followers. Some videos seemed just too banal, such as when an IS firefighter proudly displayed firefighting equipment in Raqqa.
All of this comes together to form a brand that is sellable. It's not true. They present themselves in a way that is far greater than they are. They present this utopian idea of a state, this idea that they're perfect, that they have incredible markets full of loads of food, that their school system is strong, that they have a health service that looks after everybody, that they have really good beliefs, and it goes on. But actually, what is important is the image they're selling, the brand they're selling, is very far from what the reality is.
Reports of military successes also played an important role in the Caliphate's PR machinery. According to them, the Islamists were practically invincible. There was even a daily bulletin with celebrations from the battlefield. The terrorists also had their own news agency to help cultivate their image.
The terrorist Islamic State attached great importance to being a state, and in the eyes of ISIS, a state news agency was apparently also part of a state. And that was the role that Amaq played a bit. ISIS had never openly declared that Amaq was their news agency, but the announcements from that news agency left no doubt that the connections were very close. It's interesting to note that while ISIS used very one-sided language in its statements, Amaq tried to use a sober news agency style in order to show professionalism, and Amaq also copied the tools of other news agencies and media. For example, there were infographics about ISIS attacks abroad, and this is a very recent example. Here we see very plainly the body count of the recent attacks. So we see here 200 dead in Paris, 84 dead in Nice.
For each attack, the agency also issued a news report, a kind of statement about the possible background and IS's involvement.
What's interesting about this declaration is that it doesn't actually say anything. That is, nothing more than we here in Europe know. Because in these statements, it became clear that ISIS knew little to nothing about what was specifically planned. There was obviously no specific instruction to do this and that, but that someone there acted as a lone wolf on his own, and ISIS then tried afterwards to take credit for this act to stoke terror in Germany and fear.
100,000 tweets and propaganda videos, only a fraction of what was circulating on the internet. Never before had the Islamists' terror and hate messages had such a wide reach. In response to the attacks in Paris, the hacker collective Anonymous came back and declared cyber war on the self-proclaimed caliphate.
Expect therefore a massive reaction of Anonymous. Know that we will find you and we do not let go. We will start the operation ever carried out against you. Expect many, many cyber attacks.
How do you deal with virtual terror on the World Wide Web? Defense strategies of Western nations are still geared to conventional wars.
We need to reduce to a minimum the physical caliphate and suffocate the organization, but at the same time reduce the virtual caliphate.
If someone publishes propaganda on the internet, he can reach hundreds of thousands of people with just one click. That wasn't possible 15 years ago.
So we have to put something against this. From our position, we look into messages, into content on Twitter, on Facebook, on all media, and that could be seen as violent content. That's also prohibited by not judicial authorities, but by the companies themselves. So what we are doing is making referrals, saying towards Facebook and Twitter, there is a conflict with your own rules as it goes for violent publishing or hate preaching in this and this website. Please have a look at it and decide yourselves. That's what we are doing.
Initial approaches in the fight against cyber warfare. Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg appeared before the EU Parliament in Brussels in May of 2018. MEPs expected answers to the question of how the spread of propaganda on social networks could be controlled effectively. The background to this was the misuse of polling data among Facebook users for the dissemination of targeted propaganda in the U.S. election campaign.
It's also become clear over the last couple of years that we haven't done enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, foreign interference in elections, and developers misusing people's information. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a mistake, and I'm sorry for it.
A Russian entrepreneur passed personal Facebook data to a British IT company. The company, Cambridge Analytica, used the user's details for electoral manipulation.
In 2016, we were too slow to identify Russian interference on Facebook in the US presidential election. At the time, we were more focused on more traditional kinds of cyber attacks, like phishing and malware. And we identified those and we told people. But we weren't prepared enough for the kind of coordinated misinformation operations that we are now aware of.
The data that was misused may have contributed to Donald Trump's election victory. Undecided voters in particular had apparently been targeted. Right from the start, the new president polarized his people with his extreme positions and snubbed the rest of the world.
Obamacare will fail. It will fold. It will close up.
We will soon begin the construction of a great wall along our southern border.
Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
Propaganda is more relevant than ever, also due to today's developments. We have the rise of the populists, which is discussed a lot, this trampling of politics. We also have war propaganda again quite topically with Syria and the conflict between the US and North Korea. Populism works very well because it picks up the classic war propaganda. It's us against them. We have an image of the enemy. We're the good, hardworking, decent people against the others, the elites, the establishment, or in the case of right-wing populism, also the foreigners, the strangers.
Trump's populism appealed above all to those who feared that the United States could lose power and influence in an increasingly complex world.
That's the man we need for this country. Somebody that's got backbone. Enough's enough. Last 8 years, we just filter under people's shoes. Not anymore.
War's, something that everyone prepares for or is afraid. Nobody wants to go to war, but we want to win wherever we go. We want to avoid all conflicts at all costs, but if we can't, we have to take care of business.
For some veterans, the winner of possible future wars was already certain. His name was Donald Trump.
He's not going to take any bullshit from anybody. How's that? Put that on TV.
He's going to protect our freedom.
He's going to protect us, is right. He's not going to give the country away like the other guy did. He didn't do anything.
And you are not afraid for a new war against North Korea, for example?
We're always afraid of war.
Yes. I'm not afraid. He'll end it in a day, I hope. And we can do it, you know that.
That's it.
And we should do it.
All Korea needs to do is screw up just a little bit, and Trump's going to be all over them.
In just 1 year, Donald Trump had divided the U.S. like no president before. Trump had long since identified the media as the perpetrators of the protests.
When the media lies to people, I will never, ever let them get away with it. I will do whatever I can that they don't get away with it.
Donald Trump shifted the battle for truth and opinion to Twitter. He wrote that he didn't use it because he liked it, but because the press only spread lies about him. The media had taken up the fight for the truth. The Washington Post hired dozens of new reporters. This was where Trump really created jobs. Glenn Kessler was the newsroom's fact checker. He fact-checked the president's every utterance. It was a full-time job.
So this is the 100 days of Trump claims. So we're cataloging every false statement he has made in his first 100 days.
And you can see there were only 3 days where he did not make a false claim. 2 of those days he was playing golf. There's never been a president like Donald Trump. We're already up to 317 false claims in just 60 or so days. This is unprecedented.
The Washington Post posted the top 10 presidential lies in a video on its Facebook page.
It's like I end up getting Pinocchios, right?
The Russia's a phony story. All you see is the Russia story, the Russia story.
Russia is fake news. This Russia thing with Trump and Russia.
So they made up this Russia thing to try and deflect because they're embarrassed by what happened.
Obamacare is a disaster. Obamacare is a disaster.
Disaster known as... That was easy.
Trump had revived newspapers which were already dead in their own right. There was great interest in thoroughly researched facts.
It was interesting that even traditional media and quality media managed to score through this propaganda of today, consistently debunking Donald Trump's statements with serious research, with enlightenment. The U.S. media, who were especially critical, who work on fake news, have increased their circulation. It's a topic that was not well known a few years ago and is now being discussed in the media.
Fake news, populism, propaganda, who knows who is sending what information and to what destination? Uncertainty was spreading and was reflected in the word of the year in 2016.
Post-factual was declared the word of the year 2016. Emotions, what people felt to be the truth, was more important than facts. But this word, post-factual, suggested that it was something new. But of course, alternative facts, disinformation, lies were always topical. And propaganda is aimed more and more at emotions. And it's also a presumption to think that we make decisions rationally based on facts.
Fear is a strong emotion, so facts quickly fade into the background. That was precisely the aim of Islamist attacks on tourist centers, such as those in Tunisia or Turkey. The attacks fueled uncertainty and prejudice among German tourists.
I'm afraid where there are so many people that something will happen again. I think if we hadn't booked beforehand, I wouldn't have gone. I was thinking about it yesterday, too. They're kind of creepy to me. I've just seen 2 figures dressed in black, the men. It kind of gives me the creeps. Obviously, not all of them are like that, but basically, you hear it all the time that they are.
The way propaganda works is always based on the fact that thinking is obstructed as much as possible, that emotions are targeted, so that we use our unconscious prejudices because that's the basis for propaganda, if it is to become effective at all. One of our great illusions is that we, in contrast to our neighbors, are free of prejudice, while we know very well that the others are so prejudiced. We are not.
Vorurteilsbehaftet, wir nicht.
It was not just in the U.S., but also in Europe, where groups and parties were gaining popularity who promised a break from the supposed establishment that used one-sided worldviews for propaganda to stoke fears and deliver prejudices.
Perceived crisis situations are certainly the perfect breeding ground. As soon as there's uncertainty, people believe that they can no longer trust the traditional media. With the keyword mainstream or lying press being very strongly represented in right-wing circles, they start looking for alternatives. This mood of crisis is promoted. We are doing better than ever. The economic situation is good, unemployment is falling, and yet everyone is afraid about the economy, about property, about the future. These problems are being brought up, and these fears are being deliberately stirred up.
The internet provides all kinds of information. What is missing is classification and an objective exchange. No one has to put up with critical questions about their choice of topics while clicking through the net. Instead of engaging in controversial discussions, it is easy to find sites that support the way you think.
That problem is especially relevant in social media, where we have the problem of echo chambers and filter bubbles. Users always hang out in the same environment of opinions.
Today, anyone can disseminate information, upload videos, post or tweet at any time worldwide. Neither the originator nor the targets are identifiable. The operators of internet platforms can delete obvious depictions of violence or appeals, but not subtle propaganda.
We are the ones who have to decide what helps us and what we learn something from, what we want to know or what does not contribute. It's always just us. We can't delegate this to any person. Sometimes we can trust certain people in particular, right or wrong, but for the most part, we are responsible.
This will remain a major challenge in the future. A recent development on the internet is an application that can be used to put lip movements on any face. In the face of such developments, critics see that even great democracies are in danger. American comedian and filmmaker Jordan Peele provided a disturbing example of this.
Carson is in the sunken place. Or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic.